PFF has released some numbers about this Georgia football roster that are pretty eye-opening. If you're not familiar with what PFF is, Pro Football Focus, it's kind of a database, it's a website, metric system. They do a lot of advanced stats on football, and you can see like pass rush rate, like all sorts of just random percentages and anything you'd want to analyze football. Drop like how long is someone in the pocket, all sorts of things. Well, they've done advanced stats and they do their positional rankings, and their rankings are not always accurate. Like when you see, oh, these were the top 5 receivers in 2024 or whatever, their numbers are not always exactly on par with what we think or maybe what the truth is with some of these players. Sometimes the stats is doesn't tell the whole story in football, but the numbers that they have for Georgia, the positional rankings, it really goes to show how stacked this Georgia roster is. I've made a couple videos about the concept of Georgia's roster and how stacked it is over the course of this offseason. We're getting through it. June. We're in June now. Only a couple more months till we could start talking about live football here at the end of August. But over the last few months, I've talked about Georgia versus Ohio State. Who's got the best roster? I thought you can really make an argument that Ohio State has the most stacked roster in college football. But there was one spot where Georgia really just had them at, and it's that quarterback position. Carson Beck, probably the best quarterback in college football, if you ask me. I don't think that it's. There was an immediate, yes, it's Caleb Williams last year for me. And the year before that, it was, hey, it's Bryson CJ. And pretty easy every single year, right? Well, this year, I think it's a little bit more clouded, but Carson Beck is the one that is leading the pack, a guy that's only done it for one season, but a really, really, really good first season for Georgia. When you think about the TDI-T ratio and the yards, well, PFF's got him ranked as the number 1 quarterback in college football. Let's go down the rest of it, though. That's the only thing they have Georgia number 1 at. They have them at, but every other position room is in the top 5 outside of one where they, oh no, one position room is not in the top 5 for Georgia according to PFF. Well, they're in the top 10. So you look across the board. I've got Georgia's depth chart up. Is this team as stacked as the 2021 team that had all sorts of NFL players? Well, I think that there are a ton of NFL players in this room. Quarterback, they got them at number 1. They've got Georgia having the number 3 running back room. They've got Georgia having the number 4 combined wide receiver and tight end room. They've got Georgia with the 2nd best offensive line, the 4th best defensive line, the 4th best linebacker unit. A couple of these you can argue number 1. I'd argue number 1 with the linebackers. I'd argue number 1 with the offensive line. And then they got the DBs at number 7. I think it's fair if you're going to say one room for Georgia is not in the top 5, the DB room is the one I'd point to as well, just because, hey, 3 out of the 5 starters never started before, and have never started for Georgia before. A couple guys are going to be sophomores and getting their first college starts. Is this team as stacked? First of all, I think it's very close between this team and Ohio State, and we can compare them a little bit again. I'm not really talking about Ohio State, but is this team as stacked as the 2021 Georgia football team? I'm going to try to figure out how to answer that. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post. Looking for an answer to this question, is Georgia's 2024 roster as stacked as the 2021 roster? Well, we knew how stacked the 2021 roster was going into the season. The hype was not around the defense as much as it was around the offense and around what JT Daniels and George Pickens and Eric Gilbert were going to do as a possible trio, along with James Cook and Zamir White and so and so. And then it ended up being Georgia's defense. You kind of learn that throughout the season. You see how stacked they are. You see how they shut down all these teams, literally shut out a handful of teams. You think about what they did to Arkansas, what they did to Vanderbilt, what they did to... There was at least one more shutout that year, blanking on it. And then after the fact, you see, well, the 15 draft picks. You see years after that, more and more draft picks from that team. So sometimes it'll take a little bit of time. And with this team, we'll have to see over the course of the next couple of drafts if they have as much NFL talent. But just looking at it on paper, you look at Georgia's depth chart from 2021. And we can just go by position. And for quarterback, we'll just do. Well, look, they had JT Daniels on roster, and Carson Beck, and Brock Vandagriff, and Stetson Bennett. Well, Stetson's in the NFL. JT obviously going to coach now for West Georgia. Carson Beck, the starting quarterback for Georgia. Brock Vandagriff, the starting quarterback for Kentucky this year. So quarterback-wise, you probably got to beat when you look at, we don't know exactly what Gunnar Stockton and Jaden Rashada and Ryan Puglisi are going to be. Running back-wise, well, you lean towards the 2021 team as well. You lean towards James Cook, Zamir White, Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, and RB5 being Dejan Edwards, a really, 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 really good RB5. So Georgia's running back room looked a little bit more stacked than the 2024 roster does, that features Trevor Etienne, Roderick Robinson, Branson Robinson, Cash Jones, Nate Frazier, Dwight Phillips Jr., right? You're going to have some freshmen that might contribute a little bit this year. So far, 2021, more stacked. You go to wide receiver, A.D. Mitchell, Marcus Osme-Jacksaint, George Pickens, Lai McConkey, Jermaine Burton, Arian Smith. This year, not quite as stacked. Not quite as stacked. We're getting our answer on offense. I'm saying that, and I want to point out that during this, I'm talking about how stacked this 2021 offense is on paper. Well, at the time, A.D. Mitchell was a freshman. Lai McConkey was still a freshman that hadn't contributed. So maybe it's a little bit different. You look at Georgia's wide receiver room this year. George Pickens was hurt. Marcus Jackson was coming off of injury. So the wide receiver room doesn't, it looks better on paper than it probably actually performed in 2021. So in this 2024 team, you're getting Dylan Bell and Dominic Lovett and Robert Thomas and Kobe Young. As good as a lot of those names were in 2021, I think that this 2024 room could be really good, and we know how good we think Carson Beck is going to be this year. So just knowing where they're at in time, heading into the 2021 season, you wouldn't say that, but after the fact, you would say, hey, these wide receivers absolutely sick. Then you go to the defense, and there's just no question. There's no question about it with Georgia's defense. In 2021, it was much more stacked across the board. I don't think I even have to. I don't even have to go through it. You look at the linebackers, Quay Walker, Nakobe Dean, are C.J. Allen and Smile London and Raylan Wilson going to be as good as those guys? On the defensive line, I'd be really shocked to see Nazir and Warren Brinson and Terry Ingram Dawkins be as good as those guys. And the defensive back room, you've got a Malachi Starks, you've got Dalen Everett. It's going to be shocking to see any Georgia defense be as good as that 2021 team. And obviously we know 13 of those guys in the NFL. There's going to be more that were bench players. There are more that are bench players from the defense. Kamari Lassiter is an example. Javon Bullard's an example that have already made it to the NFL. So then they were on that depth chart. They were on that depth chart already. So no, the 2024 team is not as stacked unless it turns out that a ton of these guys are as good. But this roster is still better than the rest of college football. It just is. You want to line it up against Texas and again, let's do that. Who are the three best teams in college football this year? Texas, Ohio State, Georgia. Probably in the opposite order that I just said it in. Let me get Texas's depth chart pulled up. It's easy for me to compare Georgia to Ohio State because you know more names. I don't know as many names on this Texas roster, but I do know which ones. I know a lot of them. I know that those receivers are good with Matthew Golden and Isaiah Bond. I don't know that they're quite as good as Georgia's receivers. You know what you get in Quinn Ewers. You know what you get in Carson Beck. The rest of it, though, Georgia's offensive line has just been performing. They've had so many of the same guys. Texas's guys getting older, but not as good. Ohio State, same thing. Just not in a situation where Georgia is so deep with their offensive line. So you look at that. Where Ohio State has Georgia and Texas beat is that running back and that wide receiver room, both absolutely stacked. Then you get to a defense where Texas just lost a few of its really best guys, right? You get Bill Norton in the transfer portal. You get, I'm getting a virus on my laptop as I say this, but you get guys like Bill Norton, Andrew Makuba, and Texas still is really good on offense. But in terms of this year's college football, and I think we're seeing the effects of the transfer portal and evening out teams. I don't know how many times we're going to get another defense like 21 Georgia or early Miami or 2016 or 2012 Alabama, where these teams just have a position room that's heavily stacked and full of NFL talent. You get wide receiver rooms from Ohio State and LSU, but you're not going to see like the entire offense the way that you'll see an entire, 20. It just doesn't happen super often. But you look at Georgia's team, it's got to be the most stacked one, right? I mean, you can just Ohio State's defense is very stacked, and in terms of names, JT Tuimoloau, I think Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, I can't talk, Denzel Burke, Jack Sawyer, a lot of big names. I don't know that all those big names have played up to the hype that they have. Georgia's got to deal with the same thing in terms of its defensive line, and it's time to really find out what some of those linebackers and corners are made of. But top to bottom, PFF, right to have Georgia ranked so high in all these. It'd be interesting to see. I guess I could go back. You'd have to pay for it and look at where they had all the 2021s. But Georgia, really, really stacked. I think that there's a lot of NFL talent on this team, especially on the offense. This is an offense that we're going to look back and say, whoa, they had all those guys? Those guys are in the league. That's the kind of offense you're going to have with them. The same way, talked about Georgia's defense. Thanks for watching.